The prince paid a homeless woman to have a child, but ended up on his knees begging for her love. Prince Alexander Vanderbilt stood motionless at the window of his private chambers, watching the autumn leaves dance across the courtyard below. His knuckles turned white as he gripped the stone windowsill, the royal physician's words still ringing in his ears. "I regret to inform Your Highness that there is no mistake in my diagnosis. You are unable to father children." The cold morning light cast harsh shadows across Alexander's face, handsome yet hardened by years of royal expectation. At 32, he had mastered the art of concealing emotion, but today his carefully crafted facade threatened to crumble. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Enter," he commanded, quickly composing himself. Lord Blackwood, his most trusted advisor, stepped into the room. The older man's face was etched with concern as he bowed. "Your Highness, the council awaits. They're eager to discuss the physician's findings." Alexander's jaw tightened. "No doubt they are." The council chamber fell silent as Alexander entered. 8 pairs of eyes followed his movement to the head of the table. The Duchess of Westfield, a statuesque woman in her 50s with silver-streaked black hair, watched him with particular intensity. Eleanor Westfield had been his father's closest advisor, and if palace rumors were to be believed, much more. "Gentlemen, Lady Westfield," Alexander nodded curtly. "I presume you've all heard the physician's report." Chancellor Morris, a thin man with spectacles perched on his nose, cleared his throat. "Your Highness, while this news is unfortunate, we must discuss the implications for the succession." "Indeed," Alexander said, "though I fail to see how my private medical matters concern the council." The Duchess laughed softly. "My dear Prince, nothing about your life is private, particularly not something that affects the future of the Vanderbilt line." Alexander felt a familiar irritation at her condescending tone. Though she had no official position, the Duchess wielded considerable influence, a remnant of his father's reign that Alexander had yet to dismantle. "The court sages have spoken," Lord Hastings said gravely. "They believe this affliction is no coincidence." Alexander scoffed. "You speak of superstition." "Perhaps," Hastings continued, "but many believe this is the price the Vanderbilt line pays for the acquisition of Oak Ridge County." The chamber fell silent. The conquest of Oak Ridge, or liberation, as official records stated, was rarely discussed in open council. 20 years ago, Alexander's father had seized the neighboring territory, accusing the ruling Carter family of treason. The Carters were executed, their lands absorbed into the Vanderbilt holdings, and their supporters scattered. Alexander absently touched the medallion hidden beneath his shirt, a golden disc engraved with ancient symbols, warm against his skin despite the chamber's chill. A gift from his father on the day Oak Ridge fell. "The sages speak of an old prophecy," the Duchess interjected, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "When the bloods of enemies unite willingly, light shall return to the land darkened by ambition." "Nonsense," Alexander snapped, though something about the words sent an unexpected chill down his spine. "Next, you'll suggest I should marry a Carter descendant, if any survived." The Duchess's expression remained unreadable. "The prophecy speaks of blood, not marriage, Your Highness." Alexander stood abruptly. "I've had enough of prophecies and curses. What I need are solutions." "There is Princess Julia Benson," Chancellor Morris suggested. "The Western Alliance would strengthen our borders against foreign threats. The marriage arrangements are nearly complete." "A fine match," agreed Lord Blackwood, "though it doesn't solve the matter of an heir." "Perhaps," the Duchess said carefully, "arrangements could be made discreetly." Alexander narrowed his eyes. "Speak plainly, Duchess. Find a suitable woman to bear a child. Claim the child as yours and Princess Julia's. Such things have been done before." Alexander felt a flicker of hope, quickly followed by disgust at himself for considering it. Yet what choice did he have? The continuation of his line, of his power, depended on it. His thoughts were interrupted by a messenger bursting into the room, face flushed. "Your Highness, ships have been spotted. Foreign vessels near the eastern shore." Alexander welcomed the distraction. "How many?" "Just scouts, sir. But our sources suggest a larger fleet may be assembling." The council erupted in concerned murmurs. The eastern threat had been growing for years. Settlers from distant shores claiming territory along the coast. So far, diplomatic efforts had kept conflict at bay, but tensions were mounting. "Increase coastal patrols," Alexander ordered, "and send word to our allies inland." He turned to Morris. "Expedite the marriage negotiations with Princess Julia. We'll need that alliance." As the council dispersed with their assignments, Alexander found himself alone with the Duchess. "The Eastern threat grows bolder," she mused. "They say the Carter medallion protected Oakridge from invasion for generations." Alexander touched his own medallion again. "Another superstition." "Perhaps," the Duchess smiled thinly. "Yet your father was careful to secure the second medallion when he took Oakridge. He believed in its power, even if you do not." "My father believed in many things," Alexander replied coldly. Later that night, alone in his chambers, Alexander removed the medallion from around his neck, studying it in the firelight. The strange symbols seemed almost to shift in the flickering glow. His father had given it to him with unusual solemnity. "This protects our land and legitimizes our rule. Guard it always." Alexander had never questioned why his father had kept one medallion and locked the other in the royal treasury. Now he wondered, as sleep finally claimed him. Alexander dreamed of a young girl with bright eyes and a fearless smile. They were playing in a garden he didn't recognize. "We'll be friends forever," she promised, showing him a medallion identical to his own. "It's a secret pact." He awoke with a start, the dream fading quickly, leaving only a vague sense of loss. Outside, the wind howled against the palace walls, as if the very elements were disturbed by the physician's diagnosis. Alexander made his decision. He would find a solution to ensure his line continued. A suitable woman to bear his child. A discreet arrangement, as the Duchess suggested. The Vanderbilt dynasty would not end with him. Not if he could help it. The curse, if it existed, would be broken, and no ancient prophecy would determine his fate. Dawn broke over Boston's crowded streets as Hannah Carter pulled her worn cloak tighter against the morning chill. 5 years of living in the shadows had taught her to move unseen through the bustling colonial port. She navigated the cobblestone alleys with practiced ease, her scarred face half hidden beneath her hood. The scar, a jagged line running from her right temple to her jawline, had once been a source of shame. Now it was her most effective disguise. No one would connect this disfigured commoner to the lost Countess of Oakridge. Hannah paused at a street corner, watching royal guards patrol the market square. Their blue and gold uniforms, Vanderbilt colors, still made her heart race with a mixture of fear and fury. "Looking mighty serious this morning," came a gruff voice behind her. Hannah turned to find Sam Cooper, a burly blacksmith and one of the few people who knew fragments of her true identity. Not the whole truth. No one knew that. But enough to make him a trusted ally. "Just thinking, Sam. Dangerous habit." He fell into step beside her. "Especially with that royal procession coming through today." Hannah's head snapped up. "What procession?" "Prince Alexander himself, returning from the countryside. Word is he's finalizing his marriage to some foreign princess." Sam spat on the ground. "More celebration while folks here can barely afford bread." Hannah's fingers instinctively went to the small leather pouch hidden beneath her dress, the only possession she'd managed to keep when her family's world collapsed. Inside was a folded document with the location of her family's medallion and a hand-drawn map of the royal treasury where it was kept. "The prince doesn't concern me," she lied. Sam's weathered face softened. "Your father would be proud of how you've survived, girl." Hannah nodded, unwilling to discuss her father. The official story claimed Count Edward Carter had died a traitor's death alongside her mother. But in her dreams, Hannah sometimes glimpsed her parents in a stone chamber, very much alive, whispering about the prophecy and the medallions. "Just dreams," she told herself, wishful thinking. "I should get to Mrs. Turner's," Hannah said, changing the subject. "She's expecting me to help with the children." Sam nodded. "Be careful, Hannah. Guards are jumpy with the prince in town." Hannah wove through the morning crowd toward the Turner home where she worked as a tutor to the merchant's 4 children. The position was a godsend. It provided room, board, and respectability without too many questions about her past. As she turned onto a wider street, the crowd thickened, voices rising in excitement. The royal procession was approaching. Hannah ducked into a narrow alley, intending to avoid it entirely. But curiosity, or perhaps destiny, made her pause at the alley's edge. Mounted guards cleared the street as an ornate carriage approached. Through the carriage window, Hannah caught a glimpse of the man she'd spent years hating from afar, Prince Alexander Vanderbilt, heir to the throne that should have, in part, been hers. Something unexpected fluttered in her chest as she studied his face. He was handsome in a severe way, with sharp cheekbones and a strong jaw, but it was his eyes that caught her attention. Midnight blue and somehow familiar, though she couldn't place why. The carriage passed, and Hannah released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. A strange dizziness washed over her. And suddenly she was no longer in Boston, but in a sunlit garden from long ago. "Watch this, Alex," she called, spinning in circles until she collapsed, laughing. On the grass, a boy with those same blue eyes flopped down beside her. "You're crazy, Hannah Banana. We're supposed to hate each other," she whispered conspirationally. "Our fathers said so." The boy, Alexander, though younger and softer then, shrugged. Adults are stupid sometimes. They showed each other their matching medallions, making up a secret handshake to seal their forbidden friendship. Hannah gasped as the memory surfaced, sharp and clear after years buried in her subconscious. She had met Alexander before, during a diplomatic visit her father had made to the Vanderbilt court when they were both children, perhaps 8 or 9 years old for 3 perfect days. They had played together while their fathers negotiated trade agreements. Then she'd returned home, and within a year, the Vanderbilts had declared her family traitors and seized their lands. Had Alexander recognized her from the carriage, impossible with her scar and the years that had passed. Besides, he'd likely forgotten their childhood encounter entirely. "Miss Hannah," a small voice dragged her back to the present. 8-year-old Alice Turner tugged at her cloak. "Mama sent me to find you. She says you're late for our lessons." Hannah forced a smile. "I'm sorry, Alice. I got caught in the crowd." At the Turner house, Hannah tried to focus on teaching letters and numbers, but her mind kept drifting to the recovered memory. She'd spent years planning how to reclaim her birthright and clear her family's name. The medallion was key, not just as proof of her lineage, but according to the fragments of prophecy she remembered, as protection against the foreign threats her father had always feared that night in her small attic room. Hannah unfolded the worn document containing the medallion's location, the royal treasury, in the east wing of the palace, heavily guarded, of course, but not impenetrable. She'd been gathering information for years, piecing together the palace layout from servants and merchants who supplied the court. She needed a way in, a position that would give her access to the palace without raising suspicion. But such opportunities were rare for someone like her, a nobody with a disfigured face and mysterious past. As she drifted toward sleep, her thoughts returned to Alexander. The boy who had once been her friend was now the man who controlled her family's legacy. Her enemy by blood, her target by necessity. In her dreams that night, she saw him again, not the stern prince from the carriage, but the laughing boy from the garden. They were running together through a maze of hedges, the twin medallions glowing around their necks. "We have to find each other again," Dream Alexander told her urgently, "before it's too late." She woke with tears on her face and the echo of a prophecy in her mind. "When the bloods of enemies unite willingly, light shall return to the land darkened by ambition." Hannah touched her scar in the darkness. Whatever path lay ahead, whatever opportunity arose to enter the palace and reclaim her heritage, she would seize it, even if it meant confronting the prince who had once been her childhood friend. Tomorrow, she would visit the docks and listen for news. Sailors often carried rumors from across the colonies. Perhaps she could learn more about this foreign princess, or the threats from the east that had her father so concerned before his fall. The medallion had to be recovered, the prophecy fulfilled, and if that meant infiltrating the palace and facing Alexander Vanderbilt again, so be it. A week after the royal procession, Hannah found herself at the docks, ostensibly buying fish for the Turner household, but really listening for gossip about the palace. Sailors were unloading cargo from a merchant vessel, their conversations drifting toward her on the salt-tinged breeze. "Prince ain't happy, I tell you," said a weather-beaten man hauling crates. "Marriage negotiations with Princess Julia hit some snag. Heard he was storming around town yesterday," another replied. "Looking in all sorts of strange places. Got his men searching for something, or someone." Hannah's heart quickened. The prince, searching the city, she pulled her hood lower and turned away, nearly colliding with a royal guard. "Watch where you're," he began, then paused, studying her face. "You there? Woman, what's your name?" "Mary, sir," Hannah lied smoothly, avoiding eye contact. "Mary Walsh." The guard frowned. "The prince's men are conducting interviews with unmarried women in the city. Report to the magistrate's office tomorrow morning." "Interviews?" Hannah asked before she could stop herself. "For what purpose?" "Not your concern," he snapped. "Just be there." As the guard moved on, Hannah's mind raced. What could the prince possibly want with Boston's unmarried women? More importantly, could this be the opportunity she'd been waiting for? A way into the palace that night. Hannah could barely sleep. If she failed to appear at the magistrate's office, she risked drawing unwanted attention. If she went, she risked being recognized, though that seemed unlikely after so many years. And with her changed appearance, by morning, she'd made her decision. She would go, but as Mary Walsh, not Hannah Carter. The magistrate's office was crowded with young women from across Boston, daughters of merchants, shopkeepers, and craftsmen. They whispered excitedly among themselves, sharing rumors about the mysterious summons. "I heard it's for a new position at the palace. Lady's maid to the princess." "No, it's for the harvest festival. They're selecting dancers." Hannah sat quietly, observing. Most of the women were younger than her 26 years, dressed in their finest clothes, faces bright with hope. A royal official emerged, reading names from a list. Women were called in groups of 5, disappearing into an inner chamber, then exiting through a side door. After an hour, Hannah's false name was called. She followed 4 other women into a Spartan room where a well-dressed courtier waited. He assessed them with clinical detachment, asking brief questions about their backgrounds, health, and family connections. "Age?" he asked Hannah. 26, sir. Family? None living. I work for the Turner family as a tutor." His eyes lingered on her scar. "How did you come by that mark?" "Fire, sir, when I was a child." He made a note, then dismissed the group. As Hannah turned to leave, he called her back. "Not you. Wait here." The other women shot her curious glances as they filed out. Hannah stood alone, heart hammering against her ribs. Had she been recognized? Was this a trap? The door opened again, and Hannah's breath caught in her throat. Prince Alexander Vanderbilt entered the room. He was taller than she remembered from the procession, broader through the shoulders. His dark blue jacket was immaculately tailored, his posture regal, but it was his eyes that held her. Those same midnight blue eyes from her childhood memory, now sharp with intelligence and something like desperation. "Leave us," he commanded the courtier, who bowed and exited quickly. Alexander circled Hannah slowly, assessing her. She kept her gaze lowered, playing the part of a humble subject, while her mind calculated escape routes. "Your name is Mary Walsh." His voice was deeper than she expected. "Yes, Your Highness. You have no family, no attachments." "None, sir." He stopped in front of her. "Look at me." Hannah raised her eyes, careful to keep her expression neutral, despite the storm of emotions within her. Hatred, curiosity, and something unexpected. A pull toward him she couldn't explain. "Your scar," he said, reaching out as if to touch her face before catching himself. "Does it pain you?" "No longer, Your Highness." Alexander nodded thoughtfully. "I have a proposition for you, Mary Walsh. One that could make you very wealthy, but requires absolute discretion." Hannah's pulse quickened. "I'm listening, Your Highness." "I need a child." The bluntness of his statement caught her off guard. "I don't understand." Alexander turned away, pacing the small room. "I am to marry Princess Julia Benson in 2 months, an alliance our kingdom desperately needs. But I find myself unable to father children. The princess cannot know. No one can know." Understanding dawned on Hannah. "You want a surrogate." "Precisely." He faced her again. "Someone healthy, intelligent, without family connections who might complicate matters. Someone who, with adequate compensation, would be willing to bear a child and then relinquish all claims to it." Hannah struggled to maintain her composure as the implications sank in. The prince who had destroyed her family was offering her a way directly into the palace, into his private life. It was an opportunity beyond anything she could have engineered herself. But it would mean, her mind recoiled from the personal implications. "Why me?" she managed to ask. "You're educated, judging by your speech. You have no family to question your absence. And he gestured vaguely at her face. Your scar makes you less likely to attract unwanted attention or suitors who might interfere. The cold calculation in his assessment should have angered her, but Hannah recognized the strategic advantage it offered. Her disfigurement, long a source of pain, might now be her greatest asset. The arrangement would be temporary, Alexander continued. You would live in private quarters at the palace during the pregnancy, after the birth. You would be generously compensated, enough gold to live comfortably for the rest of your life. Anywhere you choose. And the child, Hannah asked softly, would be raised as the heir to the throne, with all the privileges that entails. A flash of something like genuine emotion crossed his face. The child would want for nothing. Hannah pretended to consider, though her decision was already made. This was her chance, not just to recover the medallion, but to access palace records that might prove her family's innocence. If I agree, she said carefully, when would this arrangement begin? Immediately, tonight, if possible. Time is of the essence. He studied her face. Do you agree to my terms? Hannah thought of the boy in the garden. Now the man before her, the enemy of her blood, the unwitting key to her redemption. Yes, Your Highness, I agree. Alexander exhaled, relief evident in the slight drop of his shoulders. A carriage will collect you at sunset. Bring nothing. Everything will be provided. As he turned to leave, Hannah fought the urge to reveal herself, to see the shock on his face when he realized who she truly was. But the time wasn't right. She needed the medallion first. Needed proof. Your Highness, she called softly. He paused at the door. Have we ever met before? Perhaps when you were younger? Alexander frowned slightly, studying her face. For a heartbeat, Hannah thought she saw a flicker of recognition in his eyes, quickly dismissed. No, he said. I would remember. As the door closed behind him, Hannah released a shaky breath. The game had begun, with stakes higher than Alexander could possibly imagine. Tonight, she would enter the lion's den, not as prey, but as the hunter. Hannah watched from her carriage window as the palace gates swung open, revealing the sprawling estate she'd only seen from afar for 5 long years. Marble columns loomed against the darkening sky, windows glowing like watchful eyes in the twilight. The Vanderbilt palace, built partly with wealth stolen from her family, the carriage stopped at a discreet side entrance where a middle-aged woman in formal servant's attire waited. I am Mrs. Caldwell, the prince's head housekeeper, she said crisply as Hannah stepped down. You will address me as ma'am. You will speak to no one about the true nature of your position here. I understand, Hannah replied. Your official role is companion reader to the Lady Eleanor Westfield, who requires assistance due to failing eyesight. Few will question this arrangement, as the Duchess keeps mostly to her own quarters. Hannah's pulse quickened at the name. The Duchess of Westfield, her father's most venomous enemy, and, if her childhood memories served correctly, the architect behind the Vanderbilt seizure of Oak Ridge, Mrs. Caldwell, led her through dimly lit corridors, avoiding the main halls. Hannah memorized each turn, mentally mapping the palace layout against the fragmented floor plans she'd pieced together over the years. Her quarters were modest but comfortable, a bedroom and small sitting room tucked away in the east wing. From her window, she could see the separate structure that housed the royal treasury, tantalizingly close. You'll find suitable clothing in the wardrobe, Mrs. Caldwell said. The prince will visit you tomorrow evening. Until then, you're to remain in these rooms. Meals will be brought to you. After the housekeeper left, Hannah explored her new prison. The wardrobe contained simple but well-made dresses, nothing that would draw attention. On the bedside table lay several books, presumably for her reading duties with the Duchess. Hannah ran her fingers along the spines, pausing at a volume of ancient prophecies. She flipped it open, her breath catching at a familiar passage. When the bloods of enemies unite willingly, light shall return to the land darkened by ambition. A coincidence, surely. She slipped the book under her pillow before continuing her inspection. The door was unlocked, an unexpected freedom that made her suspicious. She peered into the hallway and found it deserted, except for a guard at the far end. Not a prisoner then, but certainly watched. Exhausted from the day's events, Hannah eventually surrendered to sleep, only to be plagued by vivid dreams. The garden from her childhood, Alexander as a boy, the two medallions glowing when brought together. She awoke at dawn, startled by a soft knock. A young maid entered with breakfast and a message. The prince was detained by urgent matters and would visit her the following evening instead. Hannah felt both relief and impatience at the delay. "Miss, if you'd like," the maid offered hesitantly. "I could show you to the library later, Mrs. Caldwell said you might want books to prepare for your duties with the Duchess." Hannah seized the opportunity. "That would be wonderful, thank you." "Lily, miss." The library was located in the central part of the palace, closer to the royal family's quarters. As they walked, Hannah observed the palace routine, where guards were stationed, which corridors seemed busiest, how servants moved through the spaces between public rooms. The library itself took her breath away. 2 stories of floor-to-ceiling shelves, ladders on brass rails, and reading nooks nestled between towering windows. Under normal circumstances, Hannah would have been enthralled, but she wasn't here for pleasure reading. "The historical records," she asked Lily casually. "Where might I find those?" "In the north corner, miss, though many of the official documents are kept in the royal archives." "Not here." The archives, another location to add to her mental map. Hannah selected several books on colonial history and one on palace architecture, which might contain more detailed floor plans. As they were leaving, a commanding voice halted them. "Who is this, Lily?" Hannah turned to face a striking woman with silver-streaked black hair and penetrating eyes. Even without an introduction, Hannah recognized her immediately. Eleanor Westfield, the Duchess herself. Lily curtsied deeply. "Miss Mary Walsh, your grace, the new companion reader assigned to you." The Duchess's eyes narrowed as they traveled from Hannah's scarred face to the books in her arms. "I don't recall requesting a reader." Hannah's mind raced. Had Alexander failed to inform the Duchess of her cover story? "A surprise from His Highness, perhaps," Hannah suggested, dropping into a perfect curtsy, the kind drilled into her as a child. "For your birthday approaching next month." The Duchess's eyebrows rose slightly, either at the curtsy or at Hannah's knowledge of her birth date, information Hannah had gathered during her years of research into her family's enemies. How thoughtful of the prince. The Duchess's tone suggested she found it anything but. "What are you reading there?" "Colonial history, your grace. I thought it might interest you." "Did you?" The Duchess stepped closer, her perfume heavy with exotic spices. "And why would you think that?" Hannah met her gaze steadily. "The founding families of the colonies shaped our present. Understanding their alliances and conflicts seems essential to understanding current politics." Something flickered in the Duchess's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, at finding intelligence where she expected none. "Bring the colonial history to my chambers this afternoon," she commanded. "We shall see if your reading voice is as thoughtful as your selection." As the Duchess swept away, Hannah released a slow breath, an unexpected complication, but potentially useful. Proximity to the Duchess might yield information about her family's downfall. Back in her quarters, Hannah carefully examined the book on palace architecture, finding a detailed floor plan that confirmed her suspicions. A hidden passage connected the east wing to the treasury building, likely used by servants transporting valuables. The entrance would be disguised, perhaps behind a decorative panel or bookcase that night, after a tense reading session with the Duchess that revealed nothing useful. Hannah waited until the palace settled into midnight silence. She slipped from her room, moving silently down the corridor toward where she suspected the hidden passage might begin. A sound stopped her. Footsteps approaching. Hannah pressed herself into an alcove, heart pounding as Prince Alexander strode past. His face troubled in the dim light of the wall sconces. He was heading away from the royal quarters, toward the gardens. Curiosity overrode caution. Hannah followed at a distance, watching as Alexander entered a small courtyard garden. In the moonlight, he removed something from around his neck, a medallion that caught the pale light with an unnatural gleam. Her medallion, one of the pair. Alexander sat on a stone bench, turning the medallion in his hands, his expression unguarded in his solitude. For a moment, Hannah saw the boy from her memories, uncertain, searching for something lost. "Where are you?" he whispered to the night air. "Why do I keep dreaming of you?" Hannah stepped back, a floorboard creaking beneath her foot. Alexander's head snapped up. "Who's there?" Hannah fled, heart racing as she navigated back to her quarters. She slipped inside just as a guard rounded the corner, responding to the prince's call. Sleep eluded her that night. Alexander was dreaming of her, or rather, of the girl she had been. Something in him remembered their childhood connection, even if his waking mind did not. Tomorrow he would come to her room, expecting to begin their arrangement. Hannah touched her scar, wondering if physical intimacy might trigger his memories completely. That couldn't happen. Not yet. She needed time to find the second medallion and gather evidence of her family's innocence. But tomorrow night, she would be face to face with her childhood friend turned enemy, the man whose child she had agreed to bear, the unwitting key to everything she had worked for these past 5 years. Hannah stared at the ceiling, heart pounding with anticipation and dread. The game had grown more complicated, the stakes impossibly high. Whatever happened tomorrow night would set her path irrevocably. She only hoped she had the strength to follow it to its end. The following evening, Hannah paced her chambers as the clock ticked closer to the appointed hour. She'd spent the day in a strange dance with the Duchess, reading historical accounts aloud while carefully observing the older woman for any reaction that might betray knowledge of the Carter family's true fate. But the Duchess was too skilled a player to reveal her hand so easily. Instead, she had questioned Hannah relentlessly about her background, seeming to test the edges of her fabricated identity. "You speak like someone educated beyond a commoner's station," the Duchess had remarked. "Who taught you?" Hannah had carefully constructed her lies around kernels of truth. "My father valued learning, your grace before he died. He ensured I was well versed in literature and history." Now, as she awaited Alexander's arrival, Hannah steeled herself for the most difficult performance yet. She had decided to delay the physical aspect of their arrangement as long as possible, searching for another approach that wouldn't compromise her mission, or her dignity. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Alexander entered without waiting for her response. Now dressed more simply than during their first meeting, though no less regal, he carried a leather-bound portfolio and appeared distracted. "Your Highness," Hannah curtsied. "Please, when we're alone, Alexander will suffice." He glanced around her quarters. "Are you comfortable here?" "Yes, Alexander." His name felt strange on her tongue, both familiar and forbidden. She'd whispered it in hatred for years, yet now found herself remembering how she'd once called him Alex as they raced through the garden maze. "I met the Duchess today," Hannah said, watching him carefully. "She seemed surprised by my appointment." Alexander frowned. "I apologize. In the rush of events, I neglected to inform her. Did she cause you trouble?" "No, she seems interesting." "Interesting is one word for Eleanor Westfield," he said dryly. "She's been a fixture at court since my father's time. Some say she was the power behind his throne." Hannah moved to the window, buying time to compose herself. "And what do you say?" "I say she has secrets I've yet to uncover." Alexander joined her at the window, his gaze following hers to the Treasury building. "But don't concern yourself with court politics. Your role here is specific and temporary." Hannah turned to face him. "About that role, I've been thinking about our arrangement." Alexander's expression hardened slightly, having second thoughts. "Seeking clarification," she countered. "This child, your heir, deserves to be conceived with some consideration. Not just clinical detachment." Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps, that a woman in her position would negotiate terms. "What are you suggesting?" "Time," Hannah said simply. "To become acquainted before we proceed. A few weeks of conversation, of understanding who we are." She held his gaze. "The child will be better for it." Alexander studied her face, his expression unreadable. "You're not what I expected, Mary Walsh. Few people are what others expect, Your Highness." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Very well, we'll take time. A luxury I'm not accustomed to indulging." He placed the portfolio on a small table. "I brought documents for you to sign, but they can wait." Relief flooded through Hannah, though she was careful not to show it. Every day of delay was another opportunity to search for the medallion and evidence of her family's innocence. "Tell me about yourself," Alexander said, settling into a chair. "Beyond what was in your interview." Hannah chose her words carefully, weaving truth with fiction. "I was born to a respected family, but circumstances changed when I was young. The fire that gave me this scar also took my parents. I've made my own way since then. You've had a difficult life. Many have suffered worse. Alexander's brow furrowed. You don't seem intimidated by me. Should I be? Most are. Hannah shrugged. Fear serves neither of us in this arrangement. Alexander leaned forward, studying her with new interest. What do you know of governance, Mary? Of how a kingdom is ruled? The question surprised her. I imagine it involves more than the pageantry commoners see. Indeed, something in his expression shifted. A vulnerability she hadn't expected. It's lonely. Decisions that affect thousands. Made in isolation because tradition demands it. Perhaps tradition deserves questioning, Hannah ventured, unable to resist testing him. A dangerous idea, but he didn't seem offended. One I've considered myself, particularly regarding the council's power structure. Their conversation continued, carefully circling personal topics while exploring ideas of justice, governance, and history. Hannah found herself genuinely engaged, discovering an intelligence in Alexander she hadn't anticipated, and glimpses of the boy she'd once known. When he finally rose to leave, hours had passed unnoticed. I have council meetings tomorrow, he said, but perhaps we could continue our conversation the following evening. I'd like that. After he departed, Hannah sat motionless, conflicted emotions churning inside her. She had expected to hate him unequivocally, to see only the Vanderbilt prince who had benefited from her family's destruction. Instead, she'd glimpsed a man struggling with the weight of inheritance and expectation. It changed nothing, she reminded herself firmly. Alexander still lived on stolen glory. Her mission remained the same. The next morning, Hannah resumed her role as the Duchess's reader, but today, she chose a different approach. Your Grace, I found something fascinating in the archives yesterday, she said, selecting her words with care. References to a prophecy about 2 medallions that protected the colonies from Eastern invaders. The Duchess's hand paused in midair, her teacup suspended. The archives are restricted. Forgive me, I meant the historical section of the library, Hannah corrected smoothly. The account mentioned the Oak Ridge territory specifically. Something about when bloods of enemies unite. Fairy tales, the Duchess dismissed, but her fingers tapped restlessly against her chair, though I'm surprised such references weren't purged from the records. Purged, Your Grace. The Duchess's sharp eyes fixed on Hannah. The Carter family committed treason against the crown. Their superstitions and claims of mystical protection were part of how they manipulated their people. Hannah managed to keep her expression neutral despite the rage building inside her. I see. How fortunate the Vanderbilts discovered their treachery. Indeed, the Duchess tilted her head. Your interest in such matters is curious for a companion. I find all history fascinating, Your Grace. After the reading session, Hannah slipped away to the library again, this time with a specific purpose. If there were records that might exonerate her family, they would be in the official archives. Not the public library, but perhaps there were clues to the archive's location. In a dusty corner, she found an old maintenance ledger detailing palace renovations. Among the entries was a notation about reinforcing the records vault beneath the east wing, directly below Hannah's quarters that night. She waited until the palace slept, before searching her rooms for access to lower levels. Behind a heavy wardrobe, she discovered what she sought. A small door, locked but yielding to her hairpin. After several tense minutes, a narrow spiral staircase led downward, with only moonlight from her window to guide her first steps. Hannah descended cautiously into darkness. At the bottom, she found herself in a cool, stone-lined corridor that smelled of old paper and ink. The royal archives, rows of shelves contained leather-bound volumes and document boxes, organized by year and subject. Hannah moved quickly to the section marked with her birth year. Searching for anything related to Oak Ridge or Carter, she found an official decree signed by Alexander's father, declaring Edward Carter and his line traders to the crown. The supposed evidence was referenced but not included. Further searching yielded a partial document, a letter intercepted between her father and a foreign diplomat, discussing protective measures against Eastern threats. The letter had been edited, certain passages underlined as proof of treasonous intent, though in context, they clearly referred to defensive strategies. Hannah carefully refolded the letter, tucking it into her sleeve, not definitive proof of her family's innocence, But a start. As she prepared to leave, a final document caught her eye, a sealed report titled Oak Ridge Medallion Acquisition. With trembling fingers, she broke the wax seal. Inside was a detailed account of how the second medallion had been taken from her family's estate, and confirmation that it remained in the treasury, kept separate from the first medallion, as the prophecy warns against their reunion. The document confirmed what Hannah had long suspected. The Vanderbilts had fabricated charges against her family to seize Oak Ridge and its mystical protection, but it also revealed that they feared the prophecy enough to keep the medallions apart. Hannah replaced the documents carefully, erasing traces of her presence before climbing back to her room. As she secured the hidden door, a terrible certainty settled over her. Alexander might be different from his father in some ways, but he lived on the wealth and power stolen from her family, and while she had glimpsed humanity in him tonight, the truth remained. Their bloodlines were locked in opposition by fate and history, yet the prophecy spoke of enemies uniting, of blood freely given, not taken. Hannah placed her hand on her abdomen, where someday soon a child might grow, a child of both Carter and Vanderbilt blood. Perhaps the arrangement she'd agreed to wasn't just her path to justice. Perhaps it was destiny itself. 3 months passed in a strange rhythm. Hannah's evenings with Alexander evolved from awkward conversations to genuine exchanges. Despite her determination to keep emotional distance, she found herself drawn to the complexity beneath his regal facade. Alexander, too, seemed transformed during their time together, laughing more freely, sharing childhood memories that occasionally made Hannah tense with recognition, and confiding his doubts about certain court traditions. The council meeting was infuriating today, Alexander said one evening as they walked through the private garden. The early autumn air carried a hint of coming frost. Lord Hastings still insists we increase taxes on the outer settlements to fund coastal fortifications. And you disagree? Hannah asked. Those settlements already struggle. Better to reduce the palace's excesses. He glanced at her. That would shock the court. A Vanderbilt suggesting royal austerity. Hannah's steps faltered slightly. Would it be so revolutionary to prioritize the people's needs? My father would have said yes. Alexander's expression darkened. He believed royal splendor was necessary to maintain respect. And you. I'm beginning to think respect earned through fear and opulence is no respect at all. He stopped beneath an oak tree. You've changed how I see things, Mary. Hannah turned away, uncomfortable with the sincerity in his voice. This wasn't supposed to happen. This genuine connection. This glimpse of the ruler Alexander could become. The agreement, she said abruptly. We've delayed its consummation for months now. Alexander was silent for a moment. Do you wish to proceed? Yes, a part of her whispered. The part focused on her mission, on the prophecy, on justice for her family. But another part, growing stronger each day, recoiled at the thought of intimate deception. Princess Julia arrives next week for the engagement ceremony, Alexander continued when she didn't answer. Time grows short. Hannah nodded. Decision made. Tomorrow night, then. Later that evening, alone in her chambers, Hannah paced restlessly. Her nightly expeditions to the archives had yielded more evidence of the conspiracy against her family, but nothing definitive enough to present as proof. The medallion remained in the treasury, which she had yet to access successfully. Meanwhile, her feelings had become dangerously complicated. How could she harbor anything but hatred for a Vanderbilt? Yet in Alexander, she increasingly saw the boy from the garden, thoughtful, kind, and trapped by circumstances beyond his control, just as she was. A soft knock interrupted her turmoil. The Duchess requests your presence immediately, a servant informed her. Hannah followed the servant to Eleanor Westfield's ornate chambers, apprehension growing with each step. The Duchess hadn't summoned her after hours before. Eleanor sat at her writing desk, a glass of dark wine at her elbow. She didn't look up as Hannah entered. Close the door. Hannah obeyed, noting the absence of servants, unusual for the Duchess, who typically maintained a constant attendant. You've been spending considerable time with the prince. Eleanor's voice was deceptively casual. As his companion reader, Your Grace, Spare me. The Duchess finally looked up, her eyes sharp as flint. I know why you're here, girl. What I don't know is whether Alexander is aware of who he's taken to his bed. Hannah's blood turned to ice. I don't understand. Don't you, Countess Carter? Or do you prefer Hannah? The Duchess smiled thinly. Did you think that scar would disguise you forever? You have your mother's eyes? I knew her well before she betrayed the crown. Hannah abandoned pretense, straightening to her full height. My mother betrayed nothing. My family was framed for treason to justify theft of our lands. An interesting perspective. The Duchess sipped her wine. Tell me, does Alexander know he's bedding the enemy's daughter? That his arrangement with you would fulfill the very prophecy we've worked decades to prevent? No, Hannah admitted. But he will. Will he? The Duchess raised an eyebrow. When? After you've secured your position by bearing his child? After you've stolen back your family's trinket from the treasury? Hannah's shock must have shown, because the Duchess laughed softly. Oh yes, I know about your midnight wanderings. The question is, what to do about them? She studied Hannah thoughtfully. I could expose you immediately, of course. Have you executed for infiltrating the palace under false pretenses? Hannah held her gaze steadily. But you won't. No. The Duchess set down her wine glass. Because I'm curious to see how this plays out. The prophecy has always been open to interpretation. What do you want from me? Information. The Duchess opened a drawer and withdrew a folded paper. Princess Julia arrives in 3 days. She brings with her this, a marriage contract already signed by her father. Hannah glanced at the document, noting the elaborate royal seal of the Western Kingdom. What isn't widely known, the Duchess continued, is that Julia cannot bear children. A childhood illness left her barren, a fact her family has concealed to secure this alliance. Hannah frowned. Then why proceed with the marriage? Because Alexander needs her family's military support against the Eastern threat, and she needs his protection for her failing kingdom. The Duchess refolded the document. A practical arrangement, complicated by your presence. I don't understand what this has to do with me. Julia knows of Alexander's condition and your arrangement. I told her myself, Hannah gasped. You betrayed Alexander's confidence. I protected this kingdom's interests. The Duchess leaned forward. Julia agreed to the arrangement on one condition, that she meet you privately before the engagement ceremony. To what end? That's between you and the princess. The Duchess stood, signaling the end of the conversation. Be in the East Garden Pavilion at midnight tomorrow. Come alone, and tell no one, especially Alexander. After a restless, sleepless night, Hannah spent the following day in a fog of anxiety. Alexander noticed her distraction when they met that evening. If you wish to delay our arrangement further, he said gently, misreading her mood. I would understand. Hannah shook her head. It's not that, She hesitated, then asked the question that had haunted her. Do you ever dream of your childhood, Alexander? Of a garden and a girl? His expression changed. A flash of recognition quickly masked. Sometimes. Why do you ask? No reason, she replied, heart pounding. He did remember at some level. Just curious about the man you were before becoming prince. Later that night, Hannah slipped through the moonlit gardens toward the pavilion. A slender figure in a dark cloak waited there, hood drawn against the autumn chill. Princess Julia, Hannah asked softly. The figure turned, lowering her hood to reveal a woman of surprising beauty, delicate features framed by auburn hair, large green eyes regarding Hannah with open curiosity. So you're the one, Julia said, her accent betraying her Western origins. The woman who will bear the heir I cannot. Hannah curtsied instinctively. Your Highness, Julia waved away the formality. We're beyond such pretenses, aren't we? Two women entangled in the same man's destiny. The Duchess said you wished to meet me. I wanted to see you for myself. Julia circled Hannah slowly. To understand what kind of woman agrees to such an arrangement. One with few alternatives, Hannah answered honestly. I think not. Julia stopped in front of her. The Duchess told me who you really are, Hannah Carter. Hannah tensed. And will you tell Alexander? That depends on you. Julia's expression softened unexpectedly. I've studied the prophecy too, you know. When the bloods of enemies unite willingly, light shall return to the land darkened by ambition. You believe in it. I believe in survival, Julia replied. My kingdom faces threats from the east, just as yours does. If there's truth to the protection those medallions once provided when united. Understanding dawned on Hannah. You want the prophecy fulfilled. I want my people safe, Julia corrected. And I'm willing to accept unconventional means to ensure it, including my husband's child being born of Oak Ridge blood. Hannah studied the princess, searching for deception, but finding only pragmatic determination. What exactly are you proposing, Your Highness? An alliance, Julia said simply. I will keep your secret and support your position. In return, when the child is born and the medallions united, my kingdom receives equal protection from whatever power they generate. It was more than Hannah had dared hope for. A powerful ally within the palace walls. Yet suspicion lingered. Why trust me? I'm a Carter, enemy to your future husband's family. Julia smiled sadly. Because like you, I know what it means to lose everything and rebuild from ashes. My mother's kingdom fell when I was a child. This marriage is my chance to restore what was lost. She extended her hand. Do we have an agreement? Countess Carter. Hannah hesitated only briefly before clasping it. We do, Princess Julia. As Hannah returned to her chambers, her mind raced with the implications of this unexpected alliance. Tomorrow night, she would finally fulfill her arrangement with Alexander, conceiving a child that might unite bloodlines and fulfill prophecy. But her heart remained divided, torn between her mission and her growing feelings for the prince who didn't recognize her, between vengeance for the past and hope for the future, between the names Hannah Carter and Mary Walsh, each representing a different path forward. Spring sunshine streamed through the windows of Hannah's chamber as she struggled through another wave of pain. 8 months had passed since her arrangement with Alexander began in earnest. 8 months of mounting complications and shifting alliances. Breathe deeply, the midwife instructed, wiping Hannah's brow with a cool cloth. The child is nearly here. Hannah gripped the sheets, focusing on her breath as another contraction seized her. In the adjoining room, she could hear Alexander pacing, his footsteps betraying his anxiety. Despite the palace custom that kept fathers away from birthing chambers, the pregnancy had changed everything. Alexander had grown increasingly attentive, their relationship evolving beyond their initial arrangement. Each night, he placed his hand on her growing belly, marveling at the life they'd created, while Hannah wrestled with guilt over her continued deception. I see the head, the midwife announced. One more push. Hannah gathered her remaining strength, crying out as she brought their child into the world. The room filled with the lusty wails of a newborn. A boy, the midwife declared, quickly wrapping the infant. Strong and healthy. Hannah collapsed against the pillows, exhausted but desperate to see her son. The midwife placed the swaddled infant in her arms. He's perfect, Hannah whispered, counting tiny fingers and toes. Then she saw it, a small, crescent-shaped birthmark just below the baby's right shoulder. Her breath caught in her throat. The mark of Oak Ridge, the same birthmark that had distinguished the legitimate Carter heirs for generations. The door burst open as Alexander rushed in, protocol forgotten in his excitement. Mary, he stopped short, his eyes fixed on the child. Is he? Your son, Hannah confirmed, her voice trembling slightly. Alexander approached cautiously, as if afraid the scene might dissolve before him. When he reached the bedside, his expression softened with wonder. He's magnificent, he murmured, gently touching the baby's cheek. Then his gaze shifted to the birthmark, visible where the swaddling had loosened. Alexander froze. That mark. He looked from the birthmark to Hannah's face, confusion giving way to dawning recognition. I've seen it before, in a portrait of... Hannah held her breath, waiting for the accusation, the anger. But Alexander's next words stunned her. I dreamed of you again last night, he said quietly. The garden, the medallions. But this time, I remembered your name. His eyes searched hers, doubt and certainty warring. Hannah, the name hung between them, an accusation, a revelation, a question. The scar disguised you, he continued, but something in me recognized you all along, Hannah Carter, the lost Countess of Oak Ridge. The midwife and her assistants exchanged alarmed glances, backing toward the door. Alexander silenced them with a raised hand. Leave us, he commanded. Speak of this to no one. When they were alone, Hannah found her voice. How long have you suspected? Pieces have been returning for months. Memories I thought were dreams. Alexander's expression hardened, but full recognition came only now, seeing the birthmark of the Carter line on my son. Our son, Hannah corrected. Holding the baby closer, Alexander paced the room, agitation evident in every movement. All this time, what was your plan? Revenge, to bear a child with a legitimate claim to both territories. Initially, yes, Hannah admitted. No more lies, she had decided. I came to recover my family's medallion and prove their innocence. The arrangement offered unexpected access. And the medallion, did you find it? No, it remains in the treasury. Alexander laughed bitterly. All this deception, and you failed in your primary mission. I succeeded in ways I couldn't have imagined, Hannah countered, looking down at their son. I found evidence that my family was falsely accused. Documents in the archives proving the charges were fabricated. Alexander stopped pacing. Show me these documents. They're hidden in my chamber, beneath the floorboard near the window. Without another word, Alexander strode to the spot she'd indicated. Kneeling to pry up the loose board, he withdrew the bundle of papers Hannah had collected over months of nighttime expeditions. As he read, his expression shifted from skepticism to shock, then to a cold anger that made Hannah pull their child closer. The Duchess's signature, he finally said, holding up a damning letter. She orchestrated the false evidence against your family. My father may have ordered the seizure, but he shook his head in disbelief. She created the justification. Her son died during the campaign, Hannah explained. I discovered that in a personal journal entry. She blamed my father, though he wasn't even present at the battle. Alexander set the documents aside, moving to the window. For a long moment, he stared out at the palace grounds, shoulders rigid with tension. What happens now? Hannah finally asked. Will you have me arrested? Executed? Alexander turned, his expression unreadable. You've borne my child under false pretenses, infiltrated my palace, and discovered state secrets that could destabilize my rule if revealed. He approached the bed slowly. By law, yes, I should have you arrested. Hannah held his gaze. And by conscience. Something in Alexander's face softened as he looked at their son, now sleeping peacefully in Hannah's arms. By conscience, I owe your family a debt that can never be repaid. He sank onto the edge of the bed. I was a child when Oak Ridge fell. I believed my father's explanations without question, but that doesn't absolve me of responsibility for continuing to benefit from that injustice. He reached out, tentatively touching the baby's tiny hand. What's more, I've grown too. He hesitated. These past months with you have changed me, Hannah, despite the deception, or perhaps because I sensed the truth beneath it. I found myself drawn to you in ways I can't explain. The prophecy? Hannah murmured. Hannah, what of it? When the bloods of enemies unite willingly, Hannah quoted. Our son carries both bloodlines. The prophecy is being fulfilled, whether we intended it or not. Alexander's expression darkened again. The eastern threat grows stronger each day. Reports came yesterday of ships amassing beyond our northern allies' borders. If the medallions truly offer protection, a commotion in the hallway interrupted them. Raised voices, running footsteps. The door flew open to reveal Lord Blackwood, face ashen. Your Highness, the princess, she's discovered. He stopped abruptly, taking in the scene before him. What's happening here? Speak plainly. Blackwood, Alexander commanded. What about Princess Julia? She's disappeared, Blackwood reported grimly. And so has the Duchess. Guards found her chambers empty with signs of struggle. This was left on her writing desk. He handed Alexander a folded note. Alexander read quickly, his face paling. The Duchess has taken Julia to Oak Ridge Fortress. She demands I bring the child there immediately, or... He crushed the note in his fist. Or what? Hannah asked, dread building inside her. Or Julia dies. Alexander looked up, his expression grim. The note mentions you by name, Hannah, not Mary Walsh. The Duchess has known your identity all along. Hannah's mind raced. She must have planned this from the beginning, waiting until the child was born. There's more, Alexander said quietly. She claims to have held your parents prisoner at Oak Ridge these past 20 years. Hannah gasped, the room spinning around her. My parents, alive. So she claims. It could be a trap. Or it could be truth. Hannah struggled to sit up, wincing. "We have to go to them." Alexander placed a restraining hand on her shoulder. "You've just given birth. You can't travel." "I must." Hannah met his gaze with determination. "This is my family. Alexander, my parents. If they truly live, and Julia has been kind to me, I won't abandon her to the Duchess's schemes." Alexander studied her face, then nodded slowly. "We'll prepare for immediate departure. A small contingent of my most trusted guards, Blackwood. Arrange it with utmost discretion," as Lord Blackwood hurried away. Alexander turned back to Hannah, his expression softening as he looked at their son. "What shall we name him?" he asked. Hannah considered. "James," she finally said, "after my grandfather, James Edward Vanderbilt Carter. A name that unites our houses," Alexander noted. "Fitting for a child who may bridge the divide between our bloodlines." He paused, then added softly, "and perhaps, in time, between his parents as well." Hannah didn't answer, but as she looked down at their son, at James, with his Oak Ridge birthmark and Vanderbilt blue eyes, she felt the prophecies weighed upon them all. Whatever awaited at Oak Ridge Fortress would determine not just their fate, but that of both kingdoms, and the moment of truth she had both sought and dreaded was finally at hand. The journey to Oak Ridge Fortress was arduous, even more so for Hannah, who was barely a day removed from childbirth. They traveled by carriage along coastal roads, the spring landscape a blur of green fields and flowering trees that belied the tension gripping their small party. Alexander rode alongside, occasionally checking on Hannah and James through the carriage window. His face remained grim, shoulders rigid beneath the simple dark cloak he wore to avoid recognition. The prince had insisted on bringing only 5 of his most trusted guards, fearing larger numbers would alert the Duchess to their approach. "How much further?" Hannah asked when they paused to rest the horses. She cradled James against her chest, grateful that he was a peaceful infant thus far. "Another hour," Alexander replied, helping her sip water from a flask. "The fortress sits on the cliffs overlooking the eastern bay. It was your family's summer residence. Originally." "I remember," Hannah said softly. "Vaguely, I was 7 the last time we spent a season there." Alexander's expression tightened. "My father converted it to a military outpost after..." He didn't finish the sentence. "After he stole it," Hannah completed bluntly. "Yes." Alexander met her gaze unflinchingly. "After he stole it, their relationship had transformed into something undefined since James's birth and the revelation of Hannah's identity. Neither enemy nor lover now, but something complicated between, bound by their child and a prophecy neither fully understood." Before they could continue, Lord Blackwood rode up swiftly. "Your Highness, scouts report movement at the fortress, a small boat launching from the private harbor." Alexander frowned. "The Duchess attempting escape." "Impossible to tell from this distance, sir. We move now," Alexander decided. "No more rest stops." Back in the carriage, Hannah clutched James tighter as they increased pace, the vehicle jolting painfully over the rough road. Outside, ominous dark clouds gathered on the horizon, matching her growing sense of foreboding. As they crested the final hill, Oak Ridge Fortress came into view, a formidable stone structure perched dramatically on the cliffside, waves crashing against the rocks below. Hannah's heart clenched at the sight, memories of childhood summers flooding back. How many times had she run through those gates, laughing, never imagining the fortress would one day become her family's prison. Movement on the parapets, one of the guards called out, pointing to figures visible on the fortress walls. Alexander signaled a halt, while they were still partially concealed by trees. "They've spotted us, despite our small number." "What's our approach?" Blackwood asked. Alexander considered. "Direct? We can't risk the Duchess harming Julia or Hannah's parents if she feels cornered." He turned to Hannah. "You and James should remain here with 2 guards while we..." "No," Hannah interrupted firmly. "My parents are in there, Alexander. I'm coming with you. It's too dangerous." "The prophecy speaks of willing union," Hannah reminded him. "This moment, facing the Duchess together, may be part of it." She met his gaze steadily. "Besides, she'll expect to see the child. That's her leverage." Alexander studied her face, then nodded reluctantly. "Stay close to me." As they approached the fortress gates, rain began to fall, light at first, then heavier, drumming against the carriage roof. The massive wooden doors stood open in apparent welcome, though no guards were visible. "It's too easy," Blackwood muttered as they entered the courtyard. Alexander nodded grimly. "Be vigilant." In the great hall, they found their answer. A dozen fortress guards lay unconscious on the stone floor, while others stood stiffly at attention, fear evident in their eyes. At the center of the room stood the Duchess, elegant as always in deep burgundy, with Princess Julia beside her. The princess's wrists bound, a thin blade pressed against her throat. "Welcome to Oakridge, Your Highness," the Duchess called out, her voice echoing in the cavernous space. "How kind of you to bring the child." "And its mother." Alexander stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of Hannah. "Release Princess Julia. She has no part in this." "On the contrary," the Duchess replied. "She has played her part perfectly. The foreign princess who accepted another woman's child as her own, all to fulfill a prophecy she barely understands." Julia's eyes met Hannah's, apology clear in her gaze. "She knew everything," Julia said. "She's been planning this for months." Silence. The Duchess pressed the blade tighter, drawing a thin line of blood on Julia's neck. 20 years I've waited, watching, ensuring the medallions remained separated, the prophecy unfulfilled. Then you, Alexander, in your arrogance and desperation, bring the Carter girl directly into the palace. Hannah stepped forward, James cradled protectively in her arms. "Where are my parents? Your note claimed they live." Something shifted in the Duchess's expression, a flicker of unease. "Bring them," she commanded, and 2 guards disappeared through a side door. Alexander's hand moved subtly toward his sword. The Duchess noticed. "I wouldn't," she warned. "My men control this fortress. One signal from me, and neither you nor your bastard heir will leave here alive." "What do you want, Eleanor?" Alexander demanded. "Power, gold, name your price for ending this madness." The Duchess laughed, the sound hollow and bitter. "What I want can never be restored, my son. My Thomas, who died when your father seized this fortress, killed by Carter soldiers." "That's a lie," Hannah protested. "My father ordered no violence during the surrender. Yet violence found us regardless," the Duchess spat, "while you played in gardens with your future prince. My son bled out in my arms, struck down in the chaos of your family's desperate last stand." Before Hannah could respond, the side door opened again. Her breath caught as 2 figures were led into the hall, a white-haired man leaning heavily on a cane, and a thin woman whose proud posture remained unbroken despite her obvious frailty. "Mother, father," Hannah's voice broke. Count Edward Carter looked up, his aged face lighting with disbelief. "Hannah, is it truly you?" The Countess Carter gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Our daughter, and a child, Edward. Look, he bears the mark." She pointed to James's shoulder, visible where the swaddling had loosened. "The birthmark of Oakridge," the Duchess confirmed coldly. "On the son of both Carter and Vanderbilt blood, the prophecy made flesh." Hannah moved toward her parents, but the Duchess raised a hand to stop her. "Not yet. First, the medallion." She gestured to Alexander. "You wear it still, I see. Remove it." Alexander's hand went to his chest, where the medallion hung beneath his shirt. "And if I refuse, then the princess dies first, followed by the Carters, and finally your child." The Duchess's voice was chillingly calm. "I've waited 20 years for my vengeance. I can wait a few minutes more." Lightning flashed outside, illuminating the stained glass windows in brilliant color. Thunder followed immediately, shaking the very foundations of the fortress. "The storm grows worse," Blackwood warned. "The Eastern Bay." "The medallion," the Duchess demanded again. Alexander slowly removed the golden disc from around his neck. As he held it up, it caught the torchlight, the ancient symbols seeming to shift and move. Hannah felt an answering warmth from beneath her cloak. The second medallion, which she had taken from the treasury before their departure, hidden until this moment. "Both medallions in the same room," the Duchess observed with satisfaction. "After decades of separation, what do you intend?" Alexander asked, medallion dangling from his hand. "The prophecy must be broken, not fulfilled," the Duchess declared. "The medallions destroyed, the bloodlines severed." Her eyes fixed on James, beginning with the child. "No," Hannah clutched James tighter. "You would murder an infant for revenge." Alexander's voice was cold with fury. "For protection," the Duchess corrected. "The Eastern forces gather strength beyond our shores. Without the prophecy's fulfillment, they will destroy us all eventually. But I would rather face that fate than see the Carter line restored through your bastard." Outside, the storm intensified, waves crashing against the cliffs with growing force. A guard burst in from the parapet entrance, soaked and breathless. "Foreign ships," he gasped. "A dozen, at least, approaching through the storm." The Duchess's eyes widened. "It's happening already, the Eastern invasion." She turned back to Alexander, blade still at Julia's throat. "Give me the medallion now." Hannah looked from her parents to Alexander, then down at James. The moment of choice had arrived, just as the prophecy foretold. "Alexander," she said quietly, "trust me." Their eyes met across the space between them. Enemies by birth, united by their child. Alexander nodded once. Decision made. "Catch," he said simply, and tossed the medallion toward Hannah. The medallion arced through the air, a golden flash against the dim hall. In that suspended moment, chaos erupted. The Duchess screamed, shoving Julia aside to lunge for the medallion. Alexander drew his sword and charged forward. Hannah's guards moved to protect her while Blackwood rushed toward the Countess and Count Carter. Hannah caught the medallion with her free hand, holding James secure against her chest with the other, the moment her fingers closed around the cool metal. A jolt of energy surged through her body. The medallion grew warm, pulsing with light that matched the rhythm of her heartbeat. "Kill them all!" the Duchess shrieked to her men, who hesitated, torn between loyalty and fear of the growing supernatural display. Hannah pulled the second medallion from beneath her cloak. As she brought the two pieces close together, their glow intensified, casting golden light across the shadowy hall. "Mother, Father, to me," Hannah called, backing toward the raised dais at the far end of the hall. Her parents broke free from their guards in the confusion, moving with surprising speed despite their years of captivity. Alexander fought his way through the melee, cutting down two of the Duchess's men who attempted to block his path. Julia, freed from the Duchess's grasp, snatched a fallen guard's dagger and joined him, her royal training in swordplay evident in her precise movements. "The child," the Duchess commanded. "Bring me the child." 3 guards closed in on Hannah. She clutched the medallions in one hand, James in the other, with no way to defend herself. Then her father appeared beside her, swinging his cane with unexpected skill, striking the first guard's knee. Her mother followed, wielding a heavy candlestick with deadly precision. "You protected us for 20 years, Count Edward said, positioning himself in front of Hannah. "Now we protect you and our grandson." The Countess smiled grimly. "We may be old, but we are still Carters." Outside, lightning struck the fortress tower with a deafening crack. The floor trembled beneath their feet as the storm intensified. Through the windows, Hannah glimpsed the foreign ships drawing closer, dark shapes against the churning sea. Alexander and Julia fought their way to the dais, forming a defensive circle with Hannah's parents around her and James. "The medallions," Alexander panted, blood trickling from a cut on his cheek. "What do we do with them?" "They must be united," Count Edward explained hurriedly. "Placed on the child born of both bloodlines. The prophecy is clear." "And if we succeed?" Julia asked, eyes darting between approaching guards. "The ancient protection will be restored," the Countess replied. "A barrier against those who would conquer our lands." The Duchess, seeing her men faltering, seized a crossbow from a fallen guard. "Fools, the medallions weren't protection. They were prison keys. The Eastern forces were contained by ancient magic until Vanderbilt arrogance unleashed them." She raised the weapon, aiming directly at Hannah and James. "I won't let you complete this ritual." Alexander threw himself forward just as the Duchess fired. The bolt meant for Hannah and James struck his shoulder instead, driving him to his knees with a pained grunt. "Alexander," Hannah cried. "I'm fine." He grimaced, pulling himself up. "Finish it now." Hannah looked down at her son, then at the medallions glowing ever brighter in her palm. "How? I don't know the words." "The words are in your blood," her father said. "In your heart? Trust yourself, Hannah." The Duchess reloaded the crossbow, her face contorted with hatred. "Your son died in battle, Eleanor," the Countess called to her. "It was tragic, but it wasn't murder. This vengeance won't bring him back. Silence, the Duchess screamed. You kept your family while I buried mine. There will be justice today. Hannah closed her eyes, breathing deeply despite the chaos. The medallions warmed further in her palm, almost hot now, their pulsing light syncing with her heartbeat. And, she realized with wonder, with James's tiny heart as well, words rose unbidden to her lips, words in a language she didn't recognize yet somehow understood. The ancient tongue of prophecy, of protection, of promise. By blood divided, by blood united, she began, her voice growing stronger with each syllable. By choice, not force, by love, not hate, we bind what was broken, we heal what was wounded. The medallions rose from her palm of their own accord. Hovering in the air before her, the symbols etched on their surfaces began to rotate, aligning in new patterns. Stop her! The Duchess shrieked, taking aim again. This time, it was Julia who intervened, hurling her dagger with precise aim. The blade struck the Duchess's hand, causing her to fire wide. The bolt buried itself in the wall as Julia followed up her throw with a charge, tackling the older woman to the ground. Hannah continued the incantation, the words flowing through her as if she'd known them all her life. The guardian awakens, the barrier rises, the protection renewed by willing sacrifice. The medallions began to spin, faster and faster, their golden light expanding to fill the hall. Everyone froze, transfixed by the display of ancient magic. The final piece, Hannah's mother urged. The child must touch them. Hannah lifted James slightly, guiding his tiny hand toward the spinning medallions. The moment his fingers brushed the golden discs, a blinding light erupted, momentarily obscuring everything in the hall. When vision returned, the medallions had merged into a single disc, larger than either had been before. Hovering above James's heart, the symbols had rearranged into a new pattern, a balanced design embodying both Carter and Vanderbilt heritage. No, the Duchess howled, breaking free from Julia. She lunged forward, a hidden dagger in her hand, aimed directly at James. This time, it was Julia who placed herself in the dagger's path. The blade plunged into her side, and she fell with a soft cry. Julia! Alexander rushed to catch her, lowering her gently to the floor. I always knew my role in this, Julia whispered, blood staining her dress. The prophecy spoke of a sacrifice, the shield that falls so others may stand. The Duchess stood frozen, shock replacing rage on her face. I never meant, not you, Julia. Outside, the foreign ships had nearly reached the harbor. Lightning struck the water around them, unnaturally precise, as if guided by an unseen hand. The merged medallion pulsed brighter, and James began to glow with the same golden light. Look, Lord Blackwood pointed to the windows. A translucent golden barrier was forming along the coastline, starting at the fortress and expanding outward in both directions. Where it touched the water, waves calmed. Where it met the foreign ships, they stopped as if hitting a solid wall. The ancient protection, Count Edward said in awe, restored at last. The single medallion descended slowly, coming to rest against James's chest. The infant opened his eyes that now glowed with the same golden light, and looked directly at the Duchess. A sound like distant bells filled the hall, and the Duchess sank to her knees, the dagger falling from her limp fingers. I see him, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. My Thomas. He's there, in the light. She reached out toward the glowing child. He forgives me. How can he forgive me after what I've done? Hannah moved to Julia, who lay pale in Alexander's arms. Can the medallion heal her? She asked her father desperately. Its purpose is protection, not healing, he replied sadly. But perhaps. Hannah knelt beside Julia, bringing James close. Thank you, she whispered to the dying princess. For everything. Julia smiled weakly. Unite your houses. Protect both kingdoms. Promise me. We promise, Alexander said, his voice thick with emotion. Outside, the barrier completed its formation. Encircling the entire coastline, the foreign ships turned away, unable to penetrate the golden shield. The storm began to subside, clouds parting to reveal stars twinkling in the night sky. In that moment of peace, Julia drew her last breath, smiling at the child who now bore the unified medallion, the guardian of two bloodlines. The fulfillment of ancient prophecy. The Duchess remained on her knees, all fight gone from her. "What happens now?" she asked hollowly. Hannah looked at Alexander, their eyes meeting over Julia's body. In that gaze was understanding, shared grief, and the first fragile strands of something that might, with time, become forgiveness. "Now," Alexander said, rising with Julia in his arms, "we honor her sacrifice by building the world she died to protect. Together." Hannah nodded, cradling James and the miracle he represented. Together. The unified medallion glowed steadily against their son's chest, a constant reminder of prophecy fulfilled and futures intertwined, not by force or fate alone, but by choice and sacrifice, and, perhaps someday, by love. 1 month after the Battle of Oak Ridge, the unified kingdom prepared for a ceremony unlike any in colonial history. The grand courtyard of the Vanderbilt Palace had been transformed with banners bearing both the Vanderbilt eagle and the Carter oak tree side by side. Common folk mingled with nobility, their traditional separation dissolved by royal decree. Hannah stood before the mirror in her chambers, hardly recognizing the woman reflected back. Gone was Mary Walsh with her humble attire and downcast eyes. In her place stood Hannah Carter, Countess of Oak Ridge, dressed in a gown of midnight blue and forest green, the colors of both houses united. Her scar, once hidden, now remained uncovered, a badge of survival rather than shame. "Are you ready?" her mother asked, entering the room with James in her arms. The Countess Carter had regained much of her strength in the weeks since their liberation, though Count Edward still walked with a cane, a permanent reminder of 20 years in captivity. "As ready as I'll ever be," Hannah replied. Taking her son, the unified medallion remained around his neck, slightly too large for his infant frame, but glowing with a steady golden light. The barrier around the coastline had held firm since that night at the fortress. Foreign ships could approach only if granted passage, a power somehow controlled by James himself, though he was only a month old. The eastern threat had retreated for now, sending diplomats instead of warships. A soft knock announced Alexander's arrival. He entered dressed in formal regalia, though notably absent was the Vanderbilt crown. "That would change today. The council is assembled," he said, "and the people wait." So much had changed between them. Grief over Julia's sacrifice had initially created distance, but the demands of governing two newly unified territories had forced them to work together. Gradually, tentative trust had formed, then mutual respect, and finally something deeper. Neither had fully acknowledged. "And the Duchess?" Hannah asked. "In attendance, under guard," Alexander confirmed. Her public confession was compelling. After the battle, Eleanor Westfield had surrendered completely, requesting the opportunity to address the council and people. She had admitted to orchestrating the false charges against the Carter family, driven by grief over her son's death. While her crimes demanded punishment, Alexander had commuted her death sentence to lifelong service establishing schools for war orphans, a mercy suggested by Hannah herself. "She's no longer a threat," Alexander added, approaching to gently touch James's cheek. "Our son has seen to that." Their gazes met over their child's head. For a heartbeat, Hannah saw again the boy from the garden, now grown into a man capable of admitting past wrongs and building something new from the ruins. "It's time," the Countess reminded them softly. Together, they walked through corridors now free of the shadows and secrets that had defined Hannah's first months in the palace. The great hall doors opened to reveal the courtyard beyond, where hundreds of citizens waited. A murmur rippled through the crowd as they appeared. Lord Blackwood, appointed Master of Ceremonies, struck his staff against the stone. "Citizens of the United Territories of Vanderbilt and Oak Ridge, bear witness to history." Hannah felt the weight of every gaze as they proceeded to the central dais. Alexander walked beside her, not ahead as protocol would have dictated in the past. On the dais stood a small table bearing 2 crowns, the traditional Vanderbilt crown and a newly forged circlet set with amber, symbolizing Oak Ridge. Beside the crowns lay a document, the new charter, establishing a council of citizen representatives to advise the crown on matters of taxation and governance. The first step toward the constitutional monarchy Alexander had promised. Count Edward and Countess Carter took positions at one side of the dais, while the council members lined the other. Among them stood merchants, craftsmen, and scholars alongside the nobility. Another break with tradition. Alexander addressed the assembly first. People of our united lands, we stand at the threshold of a new era. The prophecy that long divided our families has now united us through our son. He gestured to James, whose medallion gleamed in the sunlight. But it is not ancient magic alone that will secure our future. It is justice, compassion, and the wisdom to learn from our mistakes. He turned to Hannah, his voice softening. I stand before you to right a generational wrong. The Carter family was falsely accused, their lands unjustly taken. Today, we restore what was stolen. Not just property and titles, but honor. A ripple of surprise moved through the crowd. Though rumors had circulated, many were hearing the truth for the first time. Hannah Carter, Alexander continued formally, Countess of Oakridge, I publicly acknowledge the crimes committed against your family and offer restoration of all lands, properties, and dignities previously held by the House of Carter. Hannah stepped forward. James cradled in her arms. I accept this restoration, not for power's sake, but so that truth may finally prevail. Her voice carried clearly across the courtyard. Yet the prophecy calls not for division restored, but for enemies united. Therefore, I propose the permanent joining of our houses, Vanderbilt and Carter, not just through our son, but through formal alliance. Alexander's eyes widened slightly. They had discussed this possibility, but he hadn't expected her to propose it so publicly. What form would this alliance take, Countess Carter? Hannah met his gaze steadily. Marriage, Prince Alexander. A union of choice, not necessity. Of respect. Perhaps someday love. But most importantly, of free will. As the prophecy required, a collective gasp rose from the crowd, followed by murmurs of approval. Alexander's face softened. He stepped closer, speaking quietly enough that only she could hear. Is this duty speaking, Hannah? Or is there more? There is more, she admitted. Much more, given time. He nodded, a smile touching his lips before he turned back to address the assembly. I accept this proposal with gratitude and hope. His voice rang with genuine emotion. Let the houses of Vanderbilt and Carter be joined not just through our son, but through marriage, forming a single royal house to guide our unified territories. Lord Blackwood stepped forward, presenting the charter. The council has approved the new governance structure, with 30 representatives from across the territories. The crown will no longer rule in isolation. Hannah and Alexander both signed the document. Witnessed by the council members and Hannah's parents, then came the coronation itself. Simple by royal standards, but profound in meaning. Both received crowns, equal in status if different in design. As the ceremony concluded, Alexander took James from Hannah's arms, holding him up for all to see. The unified medallion blazed with golden light, casting a warm glow over the child and his father. Prince James Vanderbilt Carter, Alexander proclaimed, heir to both bloodlines, guardian of the Eastern Shore, symbol of our united future. The crowd erupted in cheers that echoed off the palace walls. For the first time in living memory, common citizens were invited to share in the celebration feast that followed, tables spread across the palace grounds where previously only nobility would have tread. As evening fell, Hannah found herself standing with Alexander on a palace balcony, watching stars emerge above the distant barrier that still shimmered faintly along the coastline. James slept peacefully in a cradle nearby, the medallion glowing softly against his chest. What happens now? Hannah asked quietly. We build something new, Alexander replied, his hand finding hers. Something worthy of Julia's sacrifice and our son's destiny. And us, Hannah ventured, still uncertain of the territory between them. No longer enemies, but not yet lovers in truth. Alexander turned to face her, his expression open in a way she'd never seen before. We have time, Hannah. Time to learn each other anew, without secrets or deceptions between us. He reached up slowly, his fingers gently tracing the line of her scar. I remember you now, all of you, the girl from the garden. My first friend, perhaps, someday. My truest love. Hannah leaned into his touch, finally allowing herself to acknowledge the feeling that had grown despite every reason against it. The prophecy said, when bloods of enemies unite willingly, Light shall return to the land darkened by ambition. I thought it simply meant James, but perhaps it meant all of this. The new governance, the restored balance, and perhaps, Alexander suggested softly, it meant us as well. In the cradle, James stirred, the medallion brightening momentarily before settling back to its steady glow. Outside, the barrier protecting their shores rippled like golden silk against the night sky, stronger where it encircled Oak Ridge Fortress, the place where enemies had become allies, where sacrifice had enabled renewal. To new beginnings, Hannah whispered, as Alexander's lips found hers in their first honest kiss, one given freely, without manipulation or hidden purpose, and as the medallion's light embraced them, Hannah finally understood the full meaning of the prophecy. True protection came not from magic alone, but from the courage to choose unity over division, forgiveness over vengeance, and love over hatred. A new era had indeed begun.